I've been rebuilding this Jeep basically from the axles up, turning it into an electric vehicle, and I thought I should do a video on the 12-volt system, the low voltage side of life. This isn't really going to be a how-to video, other than what I'll say is I worked on this kind of a little bit at a time over the course of a month or two. And in terms of advice on wiring your project vehicle, I think that that's the way to go. Do a little bit at a time, because building an entire car is a big project and can feel pretty daunting. So even getting one light working is a minor victory. But it also means you'll need to excuse the continuity errors in this video. This will just be the kind of highlights of some of the things that I'm doing on it that might be mildly interesting. Let's start with the battery. Because this thing doesn't have a starter motor, it doesn't really need much for a 12-volt battery. I think the biggest load on this is actually going to be the electric power steering. So this lawn tractor battery is actually going to be overkill. And I had it. There will be one other big load, which will go right about here. I'd eventually like to put a winch on this thing. General rule of thumb is you want a winch with a capacity that's about 1.5 times the weight of the vehicle. This thing probably should be around or even under 3,000 pounds. So putting a 9,000 pound winch on it's going to be overkill. I'm going to do a 5,500 pound UTV side-by-side winch on this. Should be more than enough. Doing the math on it, this should be perfectly fine. I might go to one with a little bit bigger capacity, but like I said, I had this one. So, I 3D printed a battery box for it. This is carbon fiber reinforced ASA, and I printed it with solid infill. So that can drop right in there. And the back side of it's all cut out to fit kind of these weird contours and this double layer of metal there. So I'm going to drill some holes right through there. Melt in one of these inserts here. And then see if I can do this while reaching inside the Jeep. Yeah, that's not too bad. I'm going to pretend that there's something on this Jeep that's actually level. That gave me just enough of a mark. Couple more inserts. One more hole. That thing's in there pretty solidly. It's definitely an experiment to see how the 3D printed part holds up long term. I got one of these Eaton fuse and relay blocks. I think instead of doing a bracket, I'm just going to mount it through the firewall. 3D printed a little template. Most of the wires coming from the fuse box run to somewhere under the dash first, so it kind of makes sense to keep it here. It's also a little bit more protected from the weather, and being able to pull it off the firewall makes it easier to get things crimped and installed into it. Got the negative terminal of the battery run down to ground on the original ground mount. That's kind of cool. What's left of the headlight wiring still has some cloth insulation on it, and a lot of the headlight mounts are broken. There's a whole bunch of galvanic corrosion going on here, sticking things together. But I think I can pop rivet these on from the inside. That. I really like having assortments of things like grommets or O-rings or ball bearings or kind of anything like that. Kind of like having those on hand so that when I need them, I have them. There's always that one guy at the flea market that's selling all that stuff, so when you run across that, it's worth picking them up and I just have kind of a drawer of an assortment of assortments. It's also a good way to learn what you use a lot of. Apparently I use a lot of 3/4 inch ones. I got one of these LED sealed beam conversion kits because, you know, less current and brighter and all that, but I'm really not impressed with it. First of all, it doesn't fit quite right. The original sealed beam bulbs have little standoffs here. This is metal, but it's missing those. I think this will be another case of Bamboo Lab to the rescue, though. We'll just go with these for now and maybe swap them out for something else later. 3D printed some little TPU spacers to take up that slack. Close. There we go. I think that'll work. Come on. Since I had everything pulled apart, I want to at least do a rough aim on the headlights. The idea is to mark the location of the headlights on a wall, then back the vehicle up as far as you can. I can't get it quite as far as I should be able to, but at least gives me a good idea. And then just adjust the headlights so they're slightly down and a little to the right. You want it aimed slightly down so we can go up a little bit more, because that's way down. So you kind of want it brightest part like in here. Of course I'm going to pull the grill off to add a radiator, so this is probably all going to change anyway and I'll have to redo it. The parking light turn signal housings are pretty crusty. The little tab here for the screw is rusted off, and these bulbs are pretty well seized in there. Don't trust those wires either. The glass and the bezels are in pretty decent shape, though. None of the usual Jeep suppliers have the proper beehive-style lights in stock. I could order some from India, but I figured if this is good, I might as well just 3D print some. Got some sockets off of Amazon. Of course, black's really not the best color for the interior of that. I was considering going with rust, but metallic aluminum seems better. I got some long set screws and red Loctite to make mounting studs for these. I also printed a TPU gasket for these, and they're getting LED bulbs as well. Gotta say, I'm pretty impressed with those bulbs. They're pretty bright. I've been putting these connectors everywhere that I think I might want to detach the wiring harness later. So I've got one here, and one up here going to the lights on the front, so I can disconnect this, take the grill off, or disconnect both of them and take the fender off. Those are also from an assortment, and if you want to support my collection of assortments, or my assorted collection of projects, you can pick up a Professional Project Collector Association shirt from JeremyMakesThings.net. I wanted to use the original light switch for aesthetic reasons, I guess. And also the original dimmer switch on the floor. I like kind of the crusty look. But since old crusty switches aren't always the best thing to put a load through, I'm using some relays for the load. One relay for high beam, one for low beam. And the taillights have their own relay too. These aren't exactly the same as the original style. They're the style you would get at the parts store after you smash the original ones. Or at least metal. I had 3 of the 6 sockets for the speedometer backlights and indicator lights. The insulation was pretty crusty, but that's nothing the little shrink wrap won't fix. The backlight on this is pretty subtle but effective. I got replacement sockets for the 3 missing indicator lights. So they all work now. They're not hooked up to anything, but they're ready to go for when I do want to hook them up to something. And then this relay is for the horn. It feeds power to one side of the horn, the other side's just grounded. And there's 12 volts coming into the coil on this, and the other side needs to ground through the horn button in the steering column. Originally on these Jeeps, the horn wire ran from the button down through the steering shaft and out the bottom of the steering box. Since I completely redid the steering system, that's no longer an option. And since I moved the steering column up after I redid it, I need to cut it down about 2 inches too. Kinda had to remember how I put it together. That's one way to do it. With the outer column cut down too, I can put a hole in it to get the wiring out of it. And then mark where that's going to be on the inner shaft. I'm sure there are kits to do this, or that can be adapted to do this, but I've been kind of on a kick of trying to make everything I can, and I realized I had all of the materials I needed to do this anyway. I was hoping I could push this brass sleeve onto the plastic with the tailstock, but it was a little too tight of a fit. I 3D printed a little sleeve for the button I had to fit it into the shaft, and then went really fancy on grounding it to the shaft. So now that goes into the little plastic piece. The spring goes over that. And then that goes into part of a bolt that I just drilled a little counter bore in, very off-center. Then that gets some Loctite on it, and gets threaded into a nut welded onto the steering column. Probably should have put a wrench flat on there. And we can check that with the multimeter. And while I'm getting this all put back together, I'm going to throw in this sweet vintage Napa turn signal switch. I'm not really a huge fan of the hose clamp style attachment, but I guess that's theoretically correct. and then 3D printed TPU cap over that. So now we just hook this up to the coil on the relay. Push the button. Jeez, that's loud. The problem with this thing is it only has two wires coming out, one for left and one for right. That's not a problem on the front because in addition to the parking lights, I've got separate filaments for the turn signals. The lights I put on the back have one filament for the taillights. Well, filament, they're LEDs. But one setting for the taillights, and then the brighter setting is shared between the brake lights and the turn signals. The solution to that is some more relay shenanigans. There's basically one relay for each light. The wiring diagram should look something like that. Maybe I'll just leave a link to another video that explains it better. And the ones for the back just power it off of the brake light switch when the turn signal isn't on, and off of the flasher when the turn signal is on. So now I have left turn signal, right turn signal, 4 ways, and brake lights. And if I turn on the turn signal with the brake lights on, it still flashes. And because I'm using LED bulbs, I have to use an electronic flasher. And that doesn't have an output for the indicator light on the turn signal switch. So I soldered up some diodes and tapped that into the wiring for the front turn signals. So now that works. There's a bunch more I'll have to add to this as I finish up other parts of the Jeep, but I think for now I want to do something with this mess. Well, that's looking better. There's still some more to do on this side. And I need to add either a grommet or more likely a bulkhead connector where everything goes through the firewall. But since I do have some more things to wire in, like a coolant pump and fan, I'm probably going to wait on that. I'm also going to pull this whole thing apart, pull the body off. So I'm going to deal with cleaning up the rest of the wiring then. It feels kind of wild to me to be at a point with this thing where I can start worrying about things like putting turn signals on it. This thing's really starting to feel like it's becoming a functioning automobile. Obviously, I have a good bit more work to do before I can put this thing on the road, and it's completely the wrong season to want to be driving around in this, but we're getting there, so I just want to say thank you to everyone who supported the channel and this project through Patreon, YouTube memberships, purchasing the merch at jeremymakesthings.net, and just everyone who watches the videos. So thanks for watching, and maybe a little